In 2005, Governor Schwarzenegger signed this law that said that all video games have to be labeled in terms of their violence level, and that anyone under 18 could not buy one of these without parents' permission.
People may think that video games are just for kids, but that's not the case anymore. In fact, the average age of a person who plays video games is 34. The average buyer of a video game is typically 40. So the games have to reflect the consumer.
He will fight savagely. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle.
Everybody has a different opinion of what violence is. For instance, Medal of Honor, graphics are getting more and more realistic, where sometimes it approaches a movie. They are still almost animations. They're trying to make it realistic, like combat.
We gotta get the wire clear!
Well, the industry, the software industry and the Entertainment Merchants Association sued immediately, blocked this law from ever taking effect, and said this violates the First Amendment rights of the industry and of anyone who would purchase these video games. The state of California lost in lower courts, both the district court and at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit ruled that indeed this did infringe First Amendment free speech rights.
Game here, which is actually mentioned in the Supreme Court case, Rainbow Six. You can see it has a little M on here.
Rated M for mature.
And it says recommended for 17 and up. There are other ratings also. There's E, meaning for all ages. There's a E10, which means recommended for ages 10 and up. There's a teen for teenagers 13 and up. M is 17 and older. These are recommendations. This is a voluntary system that the game industry and the retailers decided to adopt I think about 10 or 15 years ago, basically because Congress brought up this whole idea of violence in games.
The Supreme Court decided to take up the appeal. So on Election Day, November 2nd, they will hear arguments from the state of California saying violent video games do not deserve the same First Amendment protection when they are being sold to minors. The software and entertainment industry here is saying the notion of violence is a very fluid one. The state law is very ambiguous. It's hard to tell what's actually targeted here. But the Supreme Court is giving California a shot to try to defend its law.
Now, at the heart of the debate is the issue of the apparently ambiguous scientific evidence linking video games to aggression. Scientists seem to be saying that there is a link, but yet that the link is not that significant.
Dr. Sally Jefferson indicates that, quote, there is no scientific research that validates a causal link between violent media, including computer and video games, and violence. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
Again, this is a complicated issue. It depends on how you look at the question. In some ways, she's absolutely right. There's no causal link in the real world. Again, because we can't go into a house and make a child play a violent video game for 6 months and then see what happens 2 years later. That we don't have the funds to do that type of research. So again, you have to look at it. There is causal evidence in a laboratory setting, so in a very synthetic setting where we manipulate, one group plays a violent video game, the other group doesn't, then later on we assess them on some sort of outcome, we do find an effect. Now it's important to remember this is a very short term. This is usually just an hour after they play the game or so. So it's incorrect to say there's absolutely no causal relationship. But it would be also incorrect to assume that that causal relationship happens in the real world. We simply don't know from our research. And again, that's a limitation of every type of research that's ever done, is we can't make people in the real world do things. We can't randomly assign people to conditions in their everyday lives.
Thank you.
So since things seem to be so obscure on the question of aggression, and for the sake of objectivity, we decided to do some research on the benefits of playing action video games to see if they would potentially outweigh the negative accusations. One scientific study shares some startling results. It has been shown that action video game players have better hand-eye coordination and visual motor skills, such as their resistance to distraction, their sensitivity to information in the peripheral vision, and their ability to count briefly presented objects than non-players. Now let's review that list. Improved hand-eye coordination, improved visual motor skills, resistance to distraction, peripheral sensitivity, and the ability to count persons or objects very quickly. Where could somebody use all of those benefits in one place? Well, in case you were still wondering, the United States Army has already figured it out. The release of America's Army, a game created and sponsored by the United States Army, is definitely raising some concerns, to say the least.
Younger people.
America's Army is an unprecedented appeal directly into the bedrooms of kids all over the United States. The homepage of the game contains a link that takes young people right to the U.S. Army recruitment website.
If you are interested in building a military society where people know how to use weaponry and are somewhat desensitized to the loss of human life, then video games can be a fairly effective way to train that.
Did you see the concussion ring? How fast it went out?
Once the weekend warriors arrive back at their offices in the heart of Silicon Valley, the designers integrate the Army's latest innovations into the game.
This particular one is the M249. It's actually a newer model than we have in our game, updated. Evan, did you actually get to shoot this one?
Yeah, I did fire it. The biggest thing that I noticed is I was really surprised how little recoil the actual weapon really had.
Yeah, we shot it in the bipod position.
Yeah.
America's Army has been a huge success, and since its launch, the game has been downloaded more than 7 million times. In the 2 years following the game's release, the Army met its recruitment goals.
America's Army is the most cost-effective outreach they've ever done in history, full stop.
How does he know this? Because through the Freedom of Information Act, a testimony to Congress was obtained speaking to the success of using America's Army as a taxpayer-funded $32 million recruitment tool. It was stated, in testimony to Congress regarding the success of converting virtual soldiers to real ones, the Army called America's Army game more effective than any other method of contact. So in effect, since a video game is the best means that the Army has of getting people into the service, then automatically, video games are definitely one of the biggest contributors to violence. Except, it's the legal kind.
It is the closest thing you're going to get to the Army unless you join.
But unfortunately, recruitment is just where it starts.
Welcome to Real-Time Immersive.
It's not a game or a movie.
An environment that brings you the ability to operate in any condition.
It's how the U.S. Army will soon be training combat soldiers. It's called the Dismounted Soldier Training System.
This provides a virtual environment, but realistic environment that they can do all of the training that they need in order to perform their tasks.
So video games are not only being used to recruit potential soldiers, they're actually making real soldiers better.
It's 21st century. I mean, we're taking technology that's out there, and a lot of this technology, at least from the gaming side of things, are in 60–70% of our kids' homes today.
CryEngine is the next generation platform.
So why not put it in the warfighters' hands to train and to be better prepared?
So the fact is, video games can make you a much more efficient soldier. Which is why the Army is investing $50 million in combat training video games. So the question is, what happens to those who decide not to enlist? Well, history tells the tale. Again, revisiting the point that Call of Duty 2 is the highest selling video game of all time, and you begin to get the picture that there could potentially be many more of these guys in training. But an important question to address is why the demand? Why is it that video games are now outselling Hollywood in worldwide sales? Is it the fun, the violence, the interactivity, the apparent freedom? Well, believe it or not, the Bible hints at exactly why this generation is growing more and more obsessed with having a controller. Jesus reveals a fascinating principle in John 8:44. He says, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do." Now, when he said this, he was speaking to the Pharisees who were plotting his murder. But all throughout the history of humanity, the enemy of souls has desired to make human beings break the law of God. But what was the very first thing that the enemy did when he arrived on earth? He played snake. He took control of the serpent in Eden and has been seeking to do the same thing ever since. From Adam and Eve, he was seeking control. From Christ, he was seeking control. From Judas, he took control. More than anything else, the enemy's work has been to control the minds of men so that he can get them to sin. If the thing that he has most desired to do is control men to do crazy things in a world where only the characters experience the consequences, could that be the reason why the exact same thing is becoming so popular in our world today? And sadly, as millions seek to better themselves at controlling others in virtual worlds where they don't experience the consequences, video games appear to be one of the last tactics of Satan to carry out that which he has always desired to conduct against God: warfare. But in this warfare, it's not a question of taking up arms as soldiers, as much as it is, in whose hands will we be the weapons? And no longer lend your faculties as unrighteous weapons for sin to use. On the contrary, surrender your very selves to God as living men who have risen from the dead, and surrender your several faculties to God to be used as weapons to maintain the right. And so we have a choice before us. There are hidden characters in our world, of which we will be controlled by only one. Choose your side.